Hey guys, so today I'll be talking about the book and the concepts within it on Pleiadian Perspectives on Human Evolution by Amorah Quan Yin. I have the book here just to show you guys. And I took a lot away from this book, and my intention is just for you guys to have that opportunity and that information as well. So in this video three-part series, I'm going to begin with Venus, and I'll be going through each planet, and I'll just be moving through pretty quickly. There's a lot of concepts, so just to begin, I want to start with Venus, and I want to also start with the concept that each planet, including Earth, has a hierarchy of intelligence that is higher dimensional and density. So basically, all of us are imprinted and influenced by higher dimensional beings and intelligences that we cannot perceive with our physical senses, and also we influence them. Kind of the quantum notion of particle and wave form. So not going to get into all that right now, but all the premises, all the concepts within these videos rely on that premise of a cosmic hierarchy, if you will. So beginning with the first planet in this series, Venus, I'd like to talk about the arrival of the Andromedan angels. These Andromedan souls that came here to incarnate human life forms in the solar system came from Andromeda, and they come with them their experiences and their gifts and their strengths and weaknesses. So they initially just came here to learn, essentially, and to connect the universal consciousness with each other and make connections in the universe consciously and very gracefully. So that's essentially the whole premise of evolution, is to make a connected universe. But the arrival of Andromeda angels soon after hundreds of years took on the development of classes and civilizations that were established based on. At first, they were established on looks and how we perceive the other people. And I'll go into this. There's a division of classes after an initial period of beginning the civilization. And the division began with mutants, who were essentially human beings that were interbreeding and acting or involving themselves in incest, who were not expanding their horizons as far as who to breed with. So they were perceived as mutants because they would be lower cognitive functions and often come out with genetic weaknesses and also deformities. So these mutants were then chastised and kind of obscured and devalued from the people who were not mutants. So this was the initial separation in classes, and was the identity of ego, really, was the beginning of identification. So what happens next is that there's a system of hierarchy that's put in place. There's upper, middle, and lower. So the civilization on Venus was essentially very involved with the very fine things in life, like music and art. So they were artisans, and they were crafty people who would use their hands and make things and play music. And essentially the class division began with very highly regarded and experienced, as well as accomplished musicians and music instrument makers, and all the craftsmen, artisan type people. All the highly accomplished ones were at the top of the class pyramid. In the middle, we have kind of more the amateur people that, well, not so much amateur, but they were the, a step lower than the accomplishments of the professional artists and craftspeople. So, and on the lower class, we have the majority of the mutants and the people who were shunned because of their lack of creative impetus. I mean, they just were more unconsciously drawn to have sex and do those things that maybe were not prioritized in the culture, like art and craftsmanship. So in the beginning, that was the beginning. And going on, the ugly ones, now the mutants, disband from the original colony and make their own colony. So they got upset, about how they were being treated, and they didn't want to serve the higher classes anymore. So they just, non-violently, which was very intelligent of them, they split. There was an occurrence initially to enact this split, which there was a death and there was a little bit of violence, but there wasn't major death and violence. So in the original colony, we'll call this the original colony, OG colony, and then we'll put mutant colony. So in the original colony, we have lower and middle class kind of dissolve and vanish because of all the mutants, and also the middle class, like normal people who were sick of serving the higher class. So of course there were some lower and middle class that stuck around because they feared the split from the original. So that was the beginning of the split, and it inspired a lot of people to kind of get out of those structures and those social constructs that we have nowadays. That's also nothing. Another thing you'll be seeing in all these videos is very common themes in our current culture. So if nothing else, you can take away that correlation and a higher perspective on that. So as the mutants now have their own colony, they began to flourish. Really, they began to grow their own crops. They because of the original colony mating with the mutants, they actually purify their DNA a little more and begin to expand their horizons and actually become, pretty okay civilization. And these two colonies wouldn't really talk too much or like trade, so they were all on their own for a little while, and there was some resentment there and unconscious kind of anger that they were shoving away, and that'll come up back around. But going on, there in the original colony there was an upset because they were upset that they were having to serve the higher class, and the middle and lower classes in the original colony were started to rebel, and they started to become violent and steal things in a more public and climactic way. It was happening the whole time, but this initiated a kind of criminal lifestyle and also a unconscious problem that was manifesting itself as killing and stealing from the higher class, and also the higher class like even more suppressing the lower class. So moving on, those ones that were still upset began to migrate again to the mutant colony, some of them, and then those people that leave that were still upset while while both colonies are flourishing, this colony definitely had more people, and it took another blow to its population when the other class, or the lower and middle classes, dissolved and split up yet again, and then moved to the mutant colony. The mutant colony welcomed them with open arms, and the mutants were very spiritually evolved. They were compassionate, loyal. They were very generous, and unlike the higher class, who were very guarded and concerned about their role in society and about how they interact with others because of their high esteem of accomplishments. So there's always that subconscious tension there. So when the split happened, moving back to the course, the mutants welcomed the newcomers, and then those newcomers, over a period of time of years, they were outcasts of the OG, and they were newcomers of the mutants, and that resentment carried over into the mutant colony, and then they eventually essentially started stealing from the mutants, who housed them and clothed them and built them homes and stuff, and their unconscious resentment carried over into the new society, and it began to corrupt this society. So this unconsciousness is definitely a reoccurring theme, and it'll be throughout the whole series, that the emotions and the things that we shove to our shadow and shove in the dark are going to come out in some other way, shape, or form if we don't really integrate. And integration takes transformation. It really takes the destruction of walls and previous constructs of who you are and what it means to be truth truthful and honesty. So getting back to the timeline, these new rebels who rebelled against the original and betrayed the mutants now began to kill the mutants because of their genetic inferiority and also, you know, their perceived kind of the newcomers of the mutant colony still perceive themselves as higher than the mutants, even though the mutants were taking care of them, and that led to them completely, you know, trying to overtake the colony. And instead of working together and building something new and amazing over a long period of time, they wanted dominance, and they wanted to feel like they were superior, and it manifested in a way of like basically killing and stealing and taking over the colony. And you know, this was the end of the first evolutionary cycle, so everything learned in that was essentially, you know, necessary. So after that, the Emissaries of Light arrive, and they are the essentially Pleiadians and other star beings of higher dimensions, phasing into the third dimension and coming to help this civilization. And they were very, you know, this civilization was still primitive. So when they saw these light ships and these Merkaba, you know, ships of amazing, incredible light, they, you know, of course, were afraid and also awestruck and astonished and mystified. So they were glad to welcome them, and also to hear what they had to say, because they had clearly something that they didn't have. So you know, the Emissary of Light eventually came to the original colony because it was larger. So the Emissaries of Light arrive. I'll just put Emissaries of Light arrive at the original colony after the cycle of evolution, which is about like 5,200 years, and now this evolution begins to go towards a more conscious and spiritual inward kind of advancement rather than, you know, technological. So the original colony, now knowing that they are not the highest on the totem pole, they begin to become more open and heal their wounds thanks to the new Emissaries of Light and the star seeds and whatever you want to call them, star people. So the original people started to welcome, you know, the mutants. And what happened was the collective consciousness of the planet and both colonies agreed to have basically flood all the crops of the mutant colony, because it was taken over by the rebels of the original colony, and the flood destroyed the crops of the mutant colony. So it forced them to reconcile and come back. This was agreed upon on an unconscious level, and it wasn't a discussion. It was just kind of a thing that needed to happen, and in order for the evolution. So the floods brought peace, really, because it brought unity back together, and both colonies could now grow and change together instead of separate. And they would have to heal their resentment and anger and all their issues toward each other. In this period after the floods, the Mahayana consciousness started to develop, and that reigned for quite a long time while the colonies grew in population. And basically, with this consciousness, no one could progress on a spiritual and conscious level unless everyone does. So it was a very unification and relationship-based period of like thousands of years where it was their major lesson of humans on Venus. And we also see this same theme with astrology and how Venus represents relationships, peace, justice, unity, and all that good stuff. So continuing on with the timeline, after this spiritual kind of accumulation happened between the colonies and all the people of Venus, now a new race started to incarnate into the newly purified DNA of the Venus humans. So this new race was now coming from, I believe, where are they coming from? Okay, I don't know where they're coming from. This new race that was being incarnated essentially with the new DNA and these new souls were now being incarnated, and they were very different from the original colony members and the mutant colony members. So what now happens is that instead of the artistic and craftsman, artisan, kind of a little bit more primitive lifestyle, kind of was fully developed, and the spirituality met with that, then this new age and this new potential of Venus humans began with people that incarnated who had a creative impetus, and they weren't drawn to the arts. They weren't drawn to like making things with their hands and getting down and dirty and all those things that we absolutely need as humans today. But they were much more mind people. Like they were very well versed in concepts and theorizing, where more left brain essentially, and they didn't really have, to a great extent, have a striving or desire to do what has been done previously in past generations. And this began to really take flight for the evolution of Venetians. And the intermarrying actually starts to happen on a massive scale. Again, we have with the connection back with the two colonies to the one, we now have mingling, intermingling, and interbreeding. But now it became a much more less division oriented place where they no longer had the mutants and the normies or the original people, and it became a unification of all the people in the colony. So they no longer had that stigma, is what I'm trying to say. So now, after this new race comes with this technological kind of striving. Now this man against nature starts to prevail on the Venus, and then they begin to cut down the trees and do the resources and go through all the machines, all that stuff, that technological advancement that happens, and kind of the reductionistic views that come with it really was prominent, because they all wanted different results. They all didn't want to create with their hands and love each other and like do all this music stuff. They just wanted to see huge structures, and they wanted to know things, and they wanted to work with chemicals and do all the things that we do today in modern science. So science kind of begins to formulate, and then they move on to chemically triggered disasters, where disasters start to happen out of like kind of what we see through radioactive and nuclear kind of happenings. Of course, they weren't to the scale of what humans on Earth today have done to each other, like put a nuclear bomb on each other, but they were still messing around with the water supplies and the environment in a way that was basically polluting it and contaminating it. So along with that, the collective consciousness was upset, and over a course of hundreds, thousands of years, natural disasters started to happen. So after this very long period of time, spiritual values return again, and it's kind of like an ebb and flow of in and out of spiritual and technological, scientific and artistic kind of thing. So the spiritual values return, and then they start to balance again their relationships to nature, and start to understand their connection to animals as well. They start to begin to participate and really admire animals. So the colonies that were disconnected now are reconnected because of all these disasters and these chemical triggerings. And then the age of Enlightenment comes, where there's a grand kind of evening of art and science, and we're kind of approaching that ourselves right now, and it'll be exciting to see in the coming decades and centuries. But it's a bit like what what's going on now, and what I would say. And after that, that very well established balance kind of brain activity and civilization happens. Then a new incarnation and wave group of souls incarnate, and they are from the Virgo constellation, and they essentially came here thanks to higher dimensional beings, and needed healing, and needed growth and spiritual purification and all that stuff. So these newly damaged beings arrive, and they come with it a lot of inferiority complexes and beliefs that that their love is not good enough and they're not strong enough. So this new subconscious psychology and these patterns begin to emit and kind of resonate throughout the collective civilizations on Venus. And what it looked like was, suicide, depression, dementia, mental illnesses of all kinds, very scatterbrained, um, mental fog, things that we experience on, a very mass scale too. But what this new wave of souls essentially happens is kind of the fragmentation and decline of Venus, and it begins this new age where people become so detached from themselves and the connection that they have with each other, as well as like their mind, bodies, and spirits. And this is, of course, after the age of enlightenment. So when they reach a pinnacle, they go to the bottom, and if they didn't evolve and make the changes and the strides necessary, then they eventually reach a equally low point. As the age of enlightenment was high, they reach a low point, and this decline then triggers it's like a natural disaster, because this natural disaster happened because of the subconscious and the fragmentation of people and their minds. So this cataclysm that happens because of their kind of compared to us, they were much more primitive, but they essentially didn't feel the lesson here was that they didn't feel they had been good enough or strong enough, and it really led to just not being self-sovereign and being really controlled by their doubts and their fears and their misconceptions, their mental state. So that triggered a perpetual decline, and also natural disasters because of the collective and the implications it had on all the people on Venus. So it made the planet very hot, and all their crops burnt up. There's no rain. It all dried up. There's a lot of radiation. There's a lot of a lot of climate change, and we do see that today. So it eventually led to the death and extinction of